Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. You know, this video is going to be simple, but offshore fishing is something that just seems like it has always been the mystery to unlock for bass anglers. You've got pre-spawn, you've got the spawn, you've got post-spawn shallow fish and fry garters, you've got the fall feed, schooling fish, fish and grass, wintertime fish, jerk baits, all Alabama, all the different techniques that we have during the course of the year, and then you have offshore fishing. From where I'm from on the TVA at Pickwick, from late May, to about August, September, sometimes into October if you're really just trying to force it. But you've only got really 2 or 3 months of good offshore fishing where the majority of the fish are out there. But it is the technique, it is and when I say technique, it's a myriad of techniques, but it is the way that it seems like so many bass anglers just thrive to learn, and they're thirsty for learning to do it. And it's very intimidating. You're looking at nothing but water. You can't see anything with your eyes. You're having to relate off of just this awareness of where you're at, almost visually imagine what's below the surface. It's just a really cool topic and technique that bass anglers really want to try to get better at, and it can be very hard. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to give you 3 baits. You know, if I'm going out on an offshore tournament, here's my practice and my tournament for, let's say, a June tournament on the TVA. For 2 or 3 days, however many days I get to practice, I'm probably never going to have a rod on the deck. I'm going to idle all the time. I'm going to find as many schools as I can find, and that's because I've spent years and years of time on the water fishing for these offshore fish, and I just need to find as many as I can. I know I can. I expect to be able to cycle through as many schools as I can and eventually fire some up and catch them. Now, come tournament day, I'm going to have probably 15 rods on the deck. I'll just blow through some baits, a couple of different crankbaits, a couple of different swim baits, at least 1 spoon, hair jig, Carolina rig, football jig, big worm, 3 or 4 different finesse type baits, even some other just real tricky type stuff. I'm just going to have rods piled up on that deck to cycle through to catch offshore fish. If you are new at this game, or if you have not developed a lot of confidence in it, or you don't want to fool with 15 rods on the deck, this video is for you. 3 baits that time and time I go to, and that they'll cover almost every situation. I'm not saying that you'll maximize the ability or the weight that you can catch out of a school or the number of fish, but you will keep it simple. And if you're someone that is struggling with getting some confidence in offshore fishing and just trying to learn it, you don't need to confuse yourself with all those rods on the deck. So here's 3 baits. I'm going to start with the number 1 fish catcher, easy to throw, easy to learn, easy to do, and someone like me who has caught thousands of fish offshore still throws it, so it's not elementary. Don't mistake it for that. But the first one is a Carolina rig. You know, it's a bait that I probably left behind for several years when I learned the football jig and got confidence in the football jig, and they ate it really, really good there for a few years on the TVA. But now I have really come back to this Carolina rig, and I feel like I get more bites on it. It is an absolute staple for fishing offshore, and of course it's good year-round. I mean, 365 days of the year you can catch a fish on this, but for offshore, really good. Now, there are a couple of things on this Carolina rig that I do that I feel like help me get way more bites. Number 1, the setup. I'm throwing it on a 7/6 hammer, heavy or an extra heavy, and depending on how deep I'm fishing, how far I'm casting, when I'm offshore fishing 20 to 30 foot deep sometimes, I'm throwing that extra heavy 7/6. People ask me why I don't use a 7/10, 8-foot rod. I think if you go farther than 7/6, for me personally, the way that I've learned to fish a Carolina rig, the way that I work it, that extra length on that rod makes me move the rod tip more, and I'll speed that Carolina rig up too much. I lift my weight off the bottom too much, and I don't get as many bites. So 7.6 is what I've settled on. That's what I like personally. This is a really long leader for what I normally throw. I see some guys with a 5-foot leader. I think that it's harder to feel the bite, and I don't think at times that it helps you get any more bites. Sometimes I think a shorter leader is actually what they prefer because they like the noise and the clack from that weight, and they zero in on that bait when it's closer to it. But this is about as long as I will go. That's probably 3 feet. Normally I'm going to run 24 to 30 inches a leader. If I start out, I just tied this one up, I can, if I get a nick down here in front of my hook, I can always shorten up, keep the same leader instead of having to retie. 3/4 ounce weight is what I generally like, unless I'm super deep and they're pulling a ton of current. That 3/4 ounce tungsten weight, a bead. I like a clear bead, but the red bead, I don't know that I've never noticed any difference there, maybe other than every now and then, especially if I'm around spots or smallmouth, I feel like they'll grab that weight sometimes. Here on TVA right now, offshore, what I'm talking about is more largemouth, so I just burning through my red bead, so put one of them on, but I probably prefer the clear bead. To a swivel, I'm throwing 16-pound mainline sunline, 12-pound leader. Now that's light. I will be the first to tell you, a lot of guys want to throw 14, 15, even 17 on their leader. The 12-pound gets you more bites. Will you occasionally have a fish get you in some wood or on the back side of a hard, steep drop and break you off? Yes, it's going to happen, but it can't happen if you don't get the bite. So that's why I choose to throw that 12-pound leader. I'm very cognizant of checking on it after every fish, making sure I don't have any nicks, because if you've got nicks and you load into one, really bust him hard down there deep, you can break that leader off. So I like the 12-pound leader. You can go heavier if you don't want to chance it, but I think you get more bites. Now the bait, the main part of this rig, post spawn, I really like a straight profile. I'll throw this is a clone Veach basin worm. What I like about it is it's hand poured, it floats. You can literally take it off the hook, throw it in the water, and it floats like a bobber. So I just feel like, you know, on a Carolina rig, we have this imagination of it that the bait is back there floating and looking beautiful behind the weight. I've looked at Carolina rigs on long casts down shallow gravel bar banks and seen what they do. The bait is pretty much dragging behind the weight. I don't care if you're throwing a mono leader. I don't care if you're, you know, aside from using one of those little flotation goofy things that you put on your hook that I've never used, that you're not getting a lot of flotation. But with this bait, I get more bites, and I feel like when I lift that weight, because occasionally I'm going to drag it, occasionally I'll pick the weight up or almost even hop it, and I feel like this bait spends more time off the bottom than other baits that don't float. So that's why I like it. I just like a straight profile worm post spawn. You know, your creature baits, your crawfish style baits, lizards, all that, they'll catch fish. I'm not saying they won't, but for me, it's about maximizing bites. If I bring it in front of a fish, I want to give myself the best chance of getting bit. So that's that straight tail worm. That's a 5.5. I really like the 4.5 as well. I've kind of burned through them and just about out of them, so got to get some more. Another great option that I catch a lot of fish on is the clone Ringo. Absolutely, just murder them on the Carolina rig on that bait as well. It's a rib style or ring style bait, still straight worm profile. So there's your Carolina rig. Find those offshore fish, make a bomb of a long cast. Don't overfish it, don't fish it too hard. Move it with your rod tip, pick line up. A lot of people want to just reel with a reel. I feel like you get more bites moving it with a rod tip, dragging it, occasionally get it down in shell or on a drop and then kind of free it. You get a reaction bite. And on those hook sets, when that fish gets it out there deep, a lot of times you don't actually feel that fish moving with it. But if you stop and your boat is not drifting and you feel your weight moving on the bottom, that's because the fish has the bait, he is swimming with it, and he's dragging your weight along the bottom. And all you're going to feel is your weight ticking along. It's time to set the hook. It's really easy to let a fish swallow these Carolina rigs because you have a distance between connectivity of the weight and the hook. So just keep that in mind. But great fish catching bait, probably my #1. So that's why it's on the list of only 3 that you need. Next, what we're covering is fish that are actively feeding on bait offshore or trying to get a reaction strike. They're both, this crankbait is going to cover it. You know, you've got a swim bait, it's a close second in my opinion on bait fish imitating lures, but the crankbait covers more of a complete circle of what you'll do offshore. And it takes a little bit less, I guess, technique or detail. You know, you don't have to be as fine-tuned down to what size head, what kind of bait, you know, bait size, how you fish it, and line diameter. It just, swim baits are a little bit more complex, so that's why I choose the crankbait. You can do two things with this. If you see bait fish getting chased offshore, you know, gizzard shad doing the death run across the surface every now and then when the fish are down there and they push them to the surface, threadfin shads, balls of them getting pushed to the surface. If you're seeing that, pick this crankbait up, fire it in there. So there's two ways to fish this crankbait, and they're both just pretty standard. You get more confidence in them as you go. But the first way is to fire it out there. Long casts are important. I'm throwing a 7-11 medium heavy cranking. This is from Hammer. That medium heavy gives me enough backbone up this long rod to load these bigger baits like an Azuma Z-Boss 22. Bomb it way out there. I'm throwing it on 12-pound test. You're going to fire it out there. The first retrieve technique is literally burn it. You're going to point your rod down toward the water, toward the direction that you've cast. You don't really want sideways because you lose some depth with the bait, and I think it's more likely to blow out if you have the rod sideways. Say I'm throwing this way and my rod's this way and I'm reeling. So point that bait toward the lure and down at the water, and you're going to burn. You're going to crank that bait down, and then when it gets to the bottom, you're going to keep cranking. Every now and then, quick pause. But mainly you're just reeling, and what you're looking for out of that's a reaction strike. What you're looking for is that bait's down there, it deflects, it hits shell, it hits a stump, it comes off of a drop-off, and it's darting. It's doing something erratic, and that's going to draw the strikes. It'll amaze you at how many times a big plug like this, you're reeling it so fast that you think a bass couldn't bite it. I throw it on a 6-to-1 gear ratio. I don't like the 5s. I just feel like I lose the ability to impart action into that bait with that super low ratio reel that I just have to just crank and crank and crank all day long. So I like a 6. But as fast as I can reel this crankbait, sometimes those big fish, when they get it, it is gone. And when I say gone, I mean like here's the fish's mouth and the bait is plumb down, you know, just behind their gills. It's crazy. It'll blow your mind when you're reeling it that hard how well a big fish can get that bait. The second way to throw it, bomb it out there, crank it down, get it down to the depth, and then when you feel it start grinding, stop it. Pause, just, you know, a second, a second and a half sometimes, depending on how much deeper the bait will run than what the situation, what the depth you're fishing the bait is. Say if you've got a bait that runs 20 and you're throwing it up into 15, then longer pauses. If you've got a bait that runs 20, you're throwing it into 18, a little bit shorter pauses, but you're going to crank it down, get it to the bottom, get it to grinding, stop it. Go back to cranking, pull all that stretch out of your line, the rod loads up, you feel it grinding, stop it. Do it again. Get it grinding good, stop it. You're almost just letting your rod feather back to straightness, taking the load out of it, taking the stretch out of the line, letting the line relax, and then going again. It's not a quick burn, but it's a good enough pace to get that bait active again, get it cranking, get it diving, rooting. What you're doing is kicking up mud. Looks like, you know, just a disturbance on the bottom. And then when you kill it, the bait slowly feathers to a stop because you've got the rod that's taking the load out of it. You've got the line that's coming back together, pulling stretch out of it, and that bait is diving and then slowly feathers and then floats, and then you do it again. Those are the two ways to fish a crankbait. If they're on that crankbait, they're going to bite it one way or the other. So that's just simple. It'll cover bait fish. The main thing you have to be prepared for on the plug is to be sure that it is going to dive to the appropriate depth. If you're fishing schools of fish that are 20 foot on top and some of them might be sitting off the drop in 22, 25, you need a big plug that'll run deep. You need one that's going to dive at least 22 foot, like this Z-Boss, that I feel like I can get it on a long cast, especially if I go to 10-pound line. I can get it well past 20, you know, 22, 23 foot. If you're fishing deeper than that, you really got to go to one of those mag plugs that'll dive 25 to 28, like the Z-Boss from 25 from Azuma, a 10XD that'll just, you know, that has no trouble diving well beyond 20 foot. That's really the only thing to consider. You always want your crankbait to dive a little bit deeper than the fish you're targeting, so that you make sure you get it down to that depth. All right, bait number 3. What could it possibly be? We've covered a dragon bait, we've covered a bait fish bait, and now we need ultra finesse. A lot of guys are opposed to this. They want to throw that bait caster. They feel like they're less of a man if they have to pull out a spinning rod. I'm telling you, that's fine. You can, you know, wear your cutoff shirt and you can feel like a man and throw your 20-pound line on your bait caster. I'm not afraid to pick up that spinning reel and catch fish when I have to. The third choice for offshore is going to be a Ned rig. I really like that bait just for getting bites, catching fish. I like to throw it on 8-pound line. You know, sometimes I'm not scared to go down to 6. You can catch the biggest fish that swims in the Tennessee Valley Authority, you know, Tennessee River system by catching him on 6-pound line, as long as he doesn't get you around anything. So I like that EWG style concealed hook. I don't like an open hook on a Ned rig fishing offshore. You get hung too much. You're missing opportunities to catch fish, and scratching that hook point on shell, you're dulling your hook. So that's a tungsten head. That's a 1/6 ounce. Throw it on that light head. I'm going to throw it on that light line, a long leader to braid. That's 10-pound sunline to an 8-pound sunline FC leader. Long cast as far as I can, a nice rod with a lot of load to it. This is actually the Hammer 6.9 drop shot rod. It'll really fling that little Ned rig way out there. I'm going to let it get to the bottom. I'm going to reel my slack up, lift it, and then I'm going to hold it. And what you do with this Ned rig, when you lift and hold, you have a semi bow in your line, and that bait's going to glide back to you. So it's going to lift, and then it glides back to you. If you pick it up and then feed it line while it falls, it's lifting, and then it's immediately going back down to the bottom. It's lifting, immediately going back down. I get way more bites picking that bait up, not reeling. I'm lifting, holding it, high rod tip. You feel the think. That's because that bait spends more time off the bottom gliding, and it's just a little do-nothing, natural-looking bait. And when it lifts up, it gets their attention, and as it glides away from them, that's when they eat it. If it goes right back down to the bottom, a lot of times I feel like they just nose down on it and stare at it. We're fishing for pressured fish. That's why we've got the Ned rig in our hand anyway, or maybe not pressured, but fickle. They're just not in a huge feeding mood. So I just think that glide gets more bites. So I'm lifting, holding the rod tip up at about 11 o'clock, letting it glide, watching that semi-bow in my line until I see the line go rest on the surface, so I know the bait has landed again. Then I'm reeling up my slack as I drop my rod, and then repeating the process. Lift, hold it. So play around, see what works for you, but that's my best technique on fishing that Ned rig. It doesn't get hung with that you know, Texpo style EWG hook. It really buttons them up when you get that bite on that light line. You just reel down. As that line gets tight, you pull as you reel. It's not a big sweeping crazy hook set trying to cross their eyes. You're just reeling as you lean back into them. You're taking all the stretch out. That little hook will pin them, man. It'll get them, and it'll catch fish. So guys, there's your 3 options. Don't feel like you have to go spend a crazy amount of money. Don't feel like you have to have, you know, 30 rods in order to compete offshore and catch fish. And main thing, have fun, get bites, do what so many bass anglers love to do, and catch them offshore out deep in those schools where you can make the same cast, 5 casts in a row, and catch 5 fish. I love it. It's probably my favorite way to fish. It's, you know, just something that I have a passion for. I've done for a lot of years. Don't overcomplicate things. Get you a Carolina rig, a crankbait, a Ned rig. Go find some offshore bass and catch some. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. Y'all be sure and leave a comment. Please subscribe if you haven't. That means so much to me. It really helps me out. I'm trying to grow this channel and do the very best I can, just like a lot of other guys out there. But love providing content. I really love interaction from my viewers. So y'all, leave me a comment. But thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you around the corner. Thank you.